There are people walking through this life that you would never realize how completely shattered they once were. They still smile, still work, still reply to messages like everyone else, but but beneath that normal appearance is a version of themselves that once completely collapsed. Not the kind of pain that passes, but the kind that can redefine your entire being, breaking your beliefs, shaking your identity, and forcing you to learn how to exist again from zero. This is not a story about sadness. This is a story about those who have seen the deepest bottom of themselves and somehow still survived. And if you have ever felt your world fall apart, or you are trying to understand someone who has gone through that, this video is for you. Stay until the end because what you are about to hear may change the way you see pain, healing, and even yourself. And if you care about deep psychological content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. After having gone through the deepest layers of pain, the way a person perceives the world is no longer the same. Not because they have become more pessimistic, but because they can no longer view life through simple lenses. Emotions that were once easily named, sadness, joy, fear, now become complex, intertwined, and carry more nuance. They can feel gratitude and pain simultaneously, hope and caution at the same time. Their inner world is no longer a flat plane, but becomes a multidimensional space where every experience leaves a trace and is felt more profoundly. It is precisely this expansion that creates an important change. They begin to understand others in ways they could not before, not through theory, but through experiences etched deeply within themselves. When someone shares their pain, they do not rush to offer advice or try to fix it. They understand that some things cannot be resolved immediately. Instead, they are present, quietly yet firmly. And in a world that is always rushing to find answers, that presence becomes a rare and powerful form of support. But what few see is the price paid for this depth. People who have survived extreme mental pain often carry a heightened awareness of the fragility of everything. They know that things can change very quickly, that what exists today may disappear tomorrow. This awareness is not always pleasant. It makes them more cautious, sometimes more distant. They do not give trust easily as before, not because they do not want connection, but because they understand the consequences of placing trust in the wrong place. However, it is precisely within this caution that a new form of freedom exists. When a person has faced the worst and continues to live, they begin to realize that they are no longer bound by the small fears that once controlled them, worries that once dominated them. The gaze of others, perfection, societal standards gradually lose their weight, not because they have become indifferent, but because they have seen clearly what truly matters. And when unnecessary layers of pressure are removed, a new space emerges, a space for authenticity. This authenticity is not loud. It does not seek to impress. It is simply a matter of a person no longer having to pretend to be someone else to be accepted. After having lost a part of themselves and rebuilt from scratch, they understand that value does not come from meeting expectations, but from living in accordance with what has been verified through experience. This creates a form of inner stability, not dependent on external circumstances. Yet, this journey is not a straight path upward. Even after having overcome, the echoes of pain can still return in unexpected moments. A memory, a scent, a familiar situation, all can trigger old emotions. The difference is that they are no longer overwhelmed by it as before. They recognize it, accept its presence, and allow it to pass. Not because it no longer hurts, but because they have learned to coexist with the pain without being defined by it. This is a profound psychological skill, the ability to hold an experience without needing to control or eliminate it immediately. And it is precisely this ability that helps them build a different relationship with themselves. Instead of fighting against the wounded parts, they begin to listen to them. Instead of seeing them as weaknesses, they recognize them as signs of what once mattered. This change marks a shift from mere survival to understanding. Along with this, the way they perceive time also changes. In the past, the future may have seemed obvious, a natural continuation of the present. But after experiencing collapse, the future becomes more uncertain. This can create anxiety, but it also brings a deeper awareness of the value of the present. Ordinary moments, a conversation, a quiet morning, a hug, are no longer taken for granted. They become small yet meaningful anchors. And it is precisely in this shift of perception that another kind of strength begins to form. Not the strength to control life, but the strength to live with its uncertainty, an inner flexibility that allows them to adapt when everything changes, a resilience that does not come from stability, but from knowing they can endure even when everything is unstable. It is notable that these changes are not always visible from the outside. Society often looks for clear signs of success or recovery, but for these individuals, the transformation occurs on a much subtler level. It lies in how they slow their reactions instead of responding immediately, in the way they choose silence instead of argument, in the way they set boundaries without over-explaining. These things may not make a strong impression, but they reflect a profound restructuring of the psychological system. A system no longer operating on mere survival reflexes, but on understanding accumulated through experience. And although this process begins with breakdown, it does not end there. It continues to evolve step by step in the way they live, connect, and perceive the world. Therefore, when you meet someone who carries a deep calm, a serenity that is not easily explained, it may not come from an easy life. It may be the result of a long journey they have traveled, a journey in which they lost much, but also learned how to hold on to what truly matters. It is precisely within that paradox, when strength and sensitivity coexist, that a deeper level of development begins to emerge. A person who has gone through pain no longer seeks to eliminate their sensitivity as a weakness. Instead, they gradually learn to understand and use it as a subtle guidance system. This acuity not only helps them recognize danger, but also helps them discern what is genuine. In a world where many interactions are dominated by surface appearances and social roles, they tend to see through those layers, not with suspicion, but with an intuition honed through experience. However, to reach this state, they often have to go through a phase full of contradictions. There are times when they want to open up but feel compelled to withdraw. There are times when they crave connection but fear the repetition of old hurts. This is not inconsistency, but a reflection of a psychological system learning to balance protection and connection. Gradually, through new experiences, safer relationships, moments of being heard and respected, they begin to recalibrate their responses. No longer reacting in extremes as before, they develop discernment. Not everyone is dangerous, but not everyone is safe either. This discernment is one of the clearest signs of post-traumatic maturity. It allows them to enter relationships with clarity rather than blindly or defensively. They can open up in parts, observe, feel, and adjust. Trust for them is no longer a leap of faith, but a process built over time. This makes their relationships, though fewer, often deeper and more enduring. Alongside this, another subtle shift occurs: the way they face themselves. Previously, many people tended to define themselves through roles, achievements, or external recognition. But after those foundations are shaken or collapse, they are forced to seek another anchor, a support that cannot be easily taken away. This process is not easy. It requires facing parts they may have previously avoided: fear, insecurity, feelings of inadequacy. But within this confrontation, a deeper understanding of the self emerges. They begin to realize that their value does not lie in always being strong, but in the ability to continue existing even when weak. Not in always being in control, but in the ability to adapt when control is lost. This change creates a form of intrinsic self-respect, not dependent on how others perceive them, but based on what they have truly experienced and overcome. This also affects the way they make decisions. Instead of relying solely on logic or societal expectations, they begin to listen more to internal signals. A slight feeling of discomfort can catch their attention because they have learned that small signals often carry great meaning. Conversely, what brings a sense of safety, however small, is appreciated and prioritized. Their life gradually becomes less influenced by external pressures and more guided by inner alignment. However, this does not mean they are always certain. Uncertainty still exists, sometimes very clearly, but instead of seeing it as a problem to be eliminated, they learn to live with it. Uncertainty becomes a part of reality, not a sign of failure. And in accepting this, they find a form of freedom, freedom from the need to control everything to feel safe. Another aspect often overlooked is how they experience solitude. After pain, solitude is no longer simply the absence of others. It can be a feeling of not being understood, even when surrounded by a crowd. But over time, many learn to transform this solitude. They begin to build a different relationship with themselves, a relationship not based on judgment, but on acceptance. Solitude then is no longer entirely negative. It becomes a space for rest, reflection, and renewal. Along with this transformation, they also become more selective in connection, not because they become cold, but because they understand the value of energy and presence. They no longer seek quantity, but quality. A few genuine relationships can bring far more meaning than many superficial connections. And when they find those connections, they tend to cherish and nurture them deeply. It is noteworthy that despite having gone through so much, they do not necessarily become perfect or invulnerable. They can still be affected, still feel pain, still retreat in difficult moments. But the difference lies in the fact that they are no longer trapped in those states as before. They have the capacity to return, adjust, and continue. Not because they are stronger in the traditional sense, but because they understand more clearly how their inner system works. And perhaps this is the core point. People who have survived extreme mental pain do not become a better version in a linear way. They become a truer version, more complex, more contradictory, but also deeper and more flexible. They carry the memory of their collapse, but are no longer entirely defined by it. Instead, they use that experience as a foundation to understand, to connect, and to continue living in a more conscious way, though not an easier one. From this point, it becomes clear that the journey of survivors does not end with overcoming pain, but continues in the way they live with what remains. Emotional scars do not completely disappear, but they change their role. Initially, they are signs of injury. Later, they become warning signals. And over time, if integrated properly, they can become a source of insight, a form of inner wisdom built not from theory, but from experience tested and verified by reality. For this reason, when survivors enter life after a crisis, they no longer seek absolute certainty. They understand that perfect safety does not exist. Instead, they seek sufficient safety, spaces, people, relationships where they can both be themselves and be respected. This is an important shift, as it moves the focus from external control to internal awareness. They do not need everything to be perfect to feel stable. They need to sense that they have the ability to recognize when something is no longer suitable and the courage to leave when necessary. This leads to a different approach to relationships. Survivors no longer stay attached merely out of habit, obligation, or fear of loneliness. They begin to ask, does this relationship nurture me? Can I be myself in this space? These seemingly simple questions reflect a profound change in the structure of identity. Previously, when the self was heavily dependent on external validation, asking such questions could feel dangerous. But after experiencing collapse, they realized that not asking questions is even more dangerous. However, this process does not always bring relief. There are phases when survivors feel caught between two worlds, not fully fitting into the old way of living, but not yet fully settled in the new. This is the transitional space where uncertainty can become most apparent. They may feel adrift, not because they lack value, but because their system of values is being reorganized. What once mattered may no longer hold the same meaning, while new values are still forming. Within this space, a key element begins to emerge: patience with oneself. Survivors gradually learn not to force themselves to be okay according to an external standard. They understand that recovery and restructuring do not follow a straight line and cannot be shortened by mere willpower. Some days move forward and other days seem to return to old points. But instead of seeing this as failure, they begin to recognize it as part of the integration process, where the psychological system experiments, adjusts, and gradually stabilizes. Alongside this patience, another form of confidence begins to develop. Not confidence based on success or recognition, but trust in the ability to self-regulate. Survivors know that even if they are hurt again, they can find their way back. This trust does not eliminate fear, but it diminishes its power. Fear is no longer something that blocks action, but a signal to be acknowledged and considered. Another profound shift lies in how they understand the meaning of life. Previously, meaning might have been tied to big goals, clear milestones, or social expectations. But after experiencing collapse, many begin to find meaning in smaller, closer things: a sincere conversation, a moment of being understood, a brief but genuine sense of peace. These things, though not flashy, carry a weight that they may have previously overlooked. This does not mean they abandon ambition or goals. Rather, it is how they redefine the value of them. Success is no longer only about achieving something external, but also about maintaining inner balance, not about never falling, but about the ability to rise without losing oneself. This shift creates a more sustainable foundation, a foundation not easily shaken by the unavoidable fluctuations of life. At the same time, survivors develop a different relationship with the past. Instead of trying to forget or deny what happened, they gradually learn to place it in its proper context. The past is no longer something that dictates every reaction, but it is not erased either. It becomes part of the story, a part that has influence but is not the whole. This requires a deep level of acceptance. Accepting that some things cannot be changed, but the way one relates to them can be. It is precisely within this acceptance that a form of freedom begins to emerge. Not freedom from pain, but freedom from the need to constantly fight it. Survivors no longer expend all their energy avoiding or controlling. Instead, they use that energy to build, connect, and experience. Life, therefore, does not become easier, but it becomes more meaningful. And perhaps most notably, even after seeing the harshest aspects of reality, many choose not to close their hearts. They understand the risks of loving, of trusting, of attachment. They know that everything could break again. But they also know that not connecting is itself a form of loss. So they choose to continue, not because they are certain everything will be okay, but because they believe that experience, whether painful or beautiful, is still worth living. This is not simple optimism. This is a conscious decision made after fully weighing both the light and darkness of life. A decision that says, I have seen the worst, and I still choose to stay. And within that choice exists a form of quiet strength, unostentatious, requiring no proof, yet strong enough to keep moving forward, step by step, in an imperfect world that is nonetheless full of possibility.